Welcome to Diced Onion, a Warrior podcast. We're your hosts, Angelo Fioris and Mike Haggerty. Welcome to another episode where we take a look at the great show Warrior. We've been doing this now since I think like September or so, Mike, and a lot has changed in the TV landscape since we started this thing. There was a strike when we got going, if you recall, right? The writers and the actors were both on strike. And now that everybody is back to work, it's now February, we're starting to see new episodes of shows begun to hit the airwaves. So that's a relief for fans of episodic television.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a little bit of a lag with some shows. Maybe production got halted, and maybe we saw on live TV saw some more reruns than expected, and things of that nature. But we're starting to see little by little starting to come out of that lag. I think it's fair to say. So
yeah, finally,
that's good.
It is good. It's a really good thing, and now that this strike is well behind us, and there now is an opportunity. And we said this way back when we started the podcast that we were going to work on getting guests on with us, people from the show, whether they were cast or behind the scenes people, writers, whatever. But also as being union members ourselves, right? Writers Guild, SAG-AFTRA, we also knew that, we stand in support of our brothers there. So we weren't going to try to get anybody. No one was going to come on anyway to talk with us about it during that time.
No, but we are, rest assured, we are working on it, and we hope to have some guests real soon.
Yeah, hopefully real soon. But in the meantime, let's continue the great work we've been doing over the last season and a half of Warrior. And let's get into season 2, episode 7. We're now cruising towards through the back half of season 2, Mike. And this episode's called If You Wait by the River Long Enough. Original air date, Friday the 13th, November 13th, 2020. Ominous just from the air date. I love how this episode, let's get into the pre-credit scene, Mike. I love how this episode literally picks up right where we left off last week. No lag in time. There's nothing else that's going on in between. If you remember last week, the guys came back from the tournament. They walked in through the doors of Hopway headquarters, and Father June said, "You've got some serious fucking explaining to do." And that is literally where we pick up. And I love that very few TV shows, even cliffhanger shows, Mike, very few will take you from one episode to the next with no break in the timeline and literally in the next scene. And very few sequel films will do that either.
Very linear. Linear.
Thank you. I couldn't think of the right word.
Yeah, because there's a million different ways to tell a story, right? You can start from the middle, you can start from the end. Some movies start at the end, some shows start at the end, or you go back to the beginning. But there's nothing wrong with any of that. I mean, that's the creative choices. But I personally love that we're just right back into it, and we're just right there. And you don't have to wait, you don't have to pause, you don't have to start with as much as I love all the storylines in the show.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to focus on anything in the beginning until we got to this, and that was so satisfying. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and I wonder if the writers made that choice simply because of the fact that we spent almost zero time on this part of the timeline in the previous episode. So why jerk around with other filler stuff and just get right into and continue being right into the meat of the story? The one thing it reminds me of the most, and it's not TV but movies, is Rocky 2. If you recall, Rocky 2 starts literally minutes after that fight is over, where they're all in the aftermath of that boxing match. And to me, when we were growing up, that was the first sequel, I think, because sequels weren't a huge thing yet in the 70s. They just started to become one. So that was one of the first sequels, I feel like, picked up right where the film left off. And as an impressionable film viewer at that time, I just really loved that technique, and I still do.
That's a good analogy you made about Rocky too, and I'm going through my head now thinking about the other Rocky movies. I guess I was the only one that did pick up exactly where the other one left off.
Yeah, you said the word linear. This is that film literally picks up linearly because if you recall, they're both in a wheelchair being wheeled out by their respective handlers, and there's a little barking between them. Mickey yelling at Creed and back and forth, and that's what was so great about that movie. But let's get off of that now, we've established why we like the way this episode started off, and let's get into the details of what's going on here. Father Jun did tell them they got some explaining to do, and I had the inkling, Mike, that maybe the writers were misdirecting us at the end of last week, and that maybe his issue wasn't anything to do with the opium and the money, but in fact it is, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, look, Father Jun is no fool.
Right.
He knows. He's a very smart man. He's I was actually just reading something that some have likened him to. We always make the analogy to Vito Corleone because he's like the ultimate cinematic fictional gangster, and to other fictional characters that have his sort of sensibilities. And I think he's definitely one of them. My Ling, obviously, but in this case, Father Jun, he's no fool. He's no one's fool, and he knows what's going on, and he's going to confront them because he's the boss.
And he does confront them, and he confronts them with the entirety of the Tong behind him, pretty much.
Yeah, it's a power play. This episode, in many ways, is actually about a power play, and we're going to get more into that.
Yeah, there's a couple different themes in this episode.
Right, and Father Jun is clearly, like you said, he's flexing here. He's letting them know that he's got the power, at least in the moment.
And the understanding of what they've kind of been up to it so far as he's been able to piece together from what he knows, right? Because he says something to them like, take a look at these guys were your brothers once or something. So he's already, already made up his mind about Assam and young Jun, and I guess Hong by proxy.
So and just add another layer to that. There's the subtext between young Jun and Father Jun, where they're confronting each other, not just in a gangster power play kind of way, but in a father-son kind of way. Because there's always been tension.
Right. There's always been tension, but it does start out as a business argument in a sense, right? Because he is accusing them of stealing. He is accusing them of going around his back, and they are arguing back that their weakened position is all as a result of his poor decision makings, or as Assam put it, I'm not the one who bent over for my Ling.
Right, and then you got to think too at that point, what's Assam thinking here? Because he has to imagine that Father Jun's a guy who has the power to kill him. They got the whole room against him.
Yeah, I mean, they're internally they got to be shitting their pants a little bit, the three of them, while they try to process this situation and maybe, I don't know if talk your way out of it is the right word, but talk your way out of a confrontation, maybe, right? Because there's no covering up what they've done. The pieces have been put together by Father Jun, but this is where the argument now kind of goes from business and starts becoming a little combination of personal between what you highlighted, Father Jun and young Jun. And after they argue and have their little fight, this is where Father Jun decides he's kicking young Jun out of the Tong. I guess all of them, really.
Well, just hold a second, because Father Jun had a very good line here. And to me, it speaks to this scene, and it also speaks to Father Jun, where they accuse him of not exactly betraying the Tong, but not doing the best by the Tong, and he yells, "I am the Tong."
Right.
And that I think speaks to Father Jun's motivations, and we also learn later in the episode a little bit of Father Jun's backstory here, which kind of speaks to that. But we'll find out about that a little bit later.
Yeah, but you're right. That is a good point. I did get a little bit ahead of the scene here, right? But as this argument goes back and forth, something else Father Jun does here, Mike, is that he blames Assam, because he says, I didn't lose it, he lost it. I didn't give it away, he lost it. And then he also says to young Jun, everything's turned to shit since you brought him back into the fold. So he's also a bit superstitious as well, seeing Assam as an omen of bad luck.
Yeah, and it kind of, that I think also represents how Assam has really never been, at least in Father Jun's eyes, a part of the Tong. He's always been viewed as sort of not maybe as an outsider, but with a little bit of suspicion. And Father Jun has never really seemingly fully embraced Assam, and Assam is going to be his fall guy no matter what. And it's interesting. I'm sorry. Let me just say, it's interesting that he's putting the blame on him and not his son, which I think, I don't know, the romantic in me is saying maybe still there's a little bit of a father-son connection there, which I like to think.
But he does blame him for bringing him back in.
Right.
So that's the ultimate blame. Like none of this would have happened if you didn't go pick this guy up back off the streets where we left him, right? Which is what Father Jun did. Father Jun had washed his hands of Assam after he'd lost the fight. And, you know, talking about what you said now, Mike, this crossed my mind as you were speaking. His always underlying suspicion of Assam, you know, let's remember when he asked Assam if he would fight for them back in season 1, he wasn't exactly in love with Assam as a member of the Tong. He was treating him kind of shabbily to begin with. And now when they needed a warrior, he sends the new guy. And in a way, maybe he kind of hoped he was sending him to a demise, but maybe not, because the life of the Tong was on the line. So it's hard to say, did personal thoughts help influence him sending Assam to a possible death?
Yeah, maybe he viewed that as a win-win for himself. Either he gets Assam out of the picture or he wins the Battle of the Tongs. So maybe that would have been, but then his plans, we see that got gummed up. So that didn't work out.
So at this point, this scene, which is very tense now, Assam decides to start telling people what's up, right? But before that happens, this is where Mike, Father Jun decides he's going to burn young Jun out of the Tong, essentially severing ties with him forever.
Literally erasing the brand.
Yeah, so they all have a brand. They got the Hopway brand on their arms, the tattoo, however they put it on, they brand them. So the only way to burn out a brand is with more heat. And boy, the method of choice is really, really harsh. But, you know, it's funny because when he tells young Jun he's going to burn him out, young Jun does not react in a please, no, father.
No, he doesn't hesitate.
Yeah, he seems to be good with it in a sense, like at peace with his father's decision.
Yeah, and then Assam eggs him on a little bit more. There's a few words exchanged between Assam and Father Jun, and Father Jun just kind of hit the wall, and he says, will someone please dice this fucking onion?
Well, before you get to that, let's talk about the actual removing of the brand, shall we? He heats up this sword to a red hot temperature, as we can see. And young Jun rolls up his sleeve, holds his arm out, and he actually says to him, knock yourself out. Right? Knock yourself out. So Father Jun holds the arm, places the sword to that tattoo, and boy, man, young Jun stands his ground. You know, you could see the pain on his face. Great acting, by the way, man, to be able to convey pain in the way he did without uttering a sound.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he's burnt out of the Tong. He doesn't care. He says it wouldn't make a difference anyway. You don't respect me. There's a lot of stuff going on here in the father-son / business relationship. But now we get to, Assam laying it out for everybody, right? And tells them what the story is, because this is the part where they reveal that they have the money.
Yeah, and he reveals they didn't steal any money from the Tong. They made it all back, and then they point out the flaws in Father Jun's loyalty to the opium suppliers in China and how they're being undercut by Long Zi. And he's calling into question Father Jun's judgment in front of everyone. And that's when Father Jun loses it and says, will someone please dice this fucking onion?
Yeah, the last thing that he says before that line is to the guys. Assam says a couple things. He says, you know me, you know young Jun, we weren't stealing. That's number one. Boom, here's the money. Everything's accounted for. We did what we did to save the Tong, not to steal. And then that's when Father Jun says his line, will someone please dice this fucking onion now?
Yep.
And what do we see? Hesitance.
Yeah, because clearly Assam and young Jun's words have had an effect on them. And they could see the money's there on the table. You got it there in black and white, tangible. Here's the money. We didn't steal.
Right.
They brought it back to the Tong.
Right.
And they pointed out the flaws in Father Jun's policy, let's say.
Yeah. How he's running things. Not the way to do it anymore.
Right. And we see here, very interesting, that the the tables, and there is actually a table in the scene. The tables have turned. Now the tongue is not going to turn on Young Jun and Assam, even though they just saw Young Jun literally burned out.
Right.
And the tables have turned, and the power has shifted. And this scene played out so cool the way they did it, because it was kind of like everything came to a head, but it kind of was quick, but it was subtle, and it wasn't like it wasn't settled in violence. It was settled in words, and the power changed on a dime like that.
It shifted on a dime, exactly. But interestingly, though, at this point, it's hesitance, and Father Jun says, "What are you waiting for?" Right? And now it's knives out. Everyone's knives out. Even Hong is like, okay, like Hong's like, we're doing this here in the headquarters, kind of thing. But no one's acting. It's a stalemate, kind of a standoff situation. And this is where Father Jun, this is where the shift happens, Mikey, where it happens on a dime. Father Jun realizes now it got quiet, right? And the next person to speak was Father Jun. And the rule of a standoff is the first one to flinch loses. And he was the first one to flinch. You said it. This wasn't a violent confrontation. It ended up being words. And he speaks first, and he says, "You back this piece of shit over your father?" And Young Jun answers back and says, "He's backing me." And that's where, boom, it happened.
And then I thought there was a pretty interesting exchange between Father Jun and Young Jun, where Father Jun realizes that he's lost the power, and he says to Young Jun, he goes, "I hope you know what you're doing." And then Young Jun said something, and it was a way that we've not seen this side of Young Jun, at least that I can recall. He goes quietly, he goes, "I hope so too." Like, he showed self-doubt. And I don't recall, I could be wrong, but maybe I don't recall Young Jun having any self-doubt prior to this.
Yeah, that's a good point. But before that happened, when Young Jun says he's backing me, they try to convince Father Jun that they're losing, right? But he doesn't want to hear it. And then that's when knives down, and everybody stands behind Young Jun and Assam. And that is when, "I hope you know what you're doing." He also says to him, he says to his father, he says, "We're honoring your leadership, and we're celebrating your retirement. And I hope you know what you're doing." He says, "I hope so too," is where the scene kind of closes. And it's interesting because now he sits down at the chair. Young Jun takes the seat at that table that has completely flipped everything dynamic of the hop way around. And he is in charge, and he's got full support, except for Father Jun.
Yeah, he's the new big boss, but say goodbye to the old boss, say hello to the new boss.
Yeah. And amazingly, Mike, that's just the opening scene of the episode. We spent all this time talking about it, but it was so monumental in the result of this scene that it needed to be dissected like this.
Yeah, it was. The opening scene was. Maybe you don't see an opening scene like this very often, where basically everything is laid out on the table, and this scene could have been a whole episode onto itself. Actually,
what's really funny is, while watching it again to take notes, that was my thought. I'm like, wow, we're like a half hour into this episode already, and it was only like 6 minutes.
Yeah. I never seen such a consequential opening scene that I can recall.
I mean, wow. I mean, a complete, a shift in power dynamics in a show that has, episodes every week or whatever, doesn't typically happen in a blink of an eye. So, that was a pretty cool device and stunt pulled off by the writers. I mean, that could have very well just as been the final scene of last week's episode.
Right.
Could have been. All right. Yeah. So we move on now. Let's get into the episode and reacquaint ourselves with everybody else from Chinatown. I feel like we haven't talked about them in forever because of last week's bottle episode. But we start off with Li Yang and Mai Ling. Li Yang's over there talking to the Feng Hai. Remember, the Feng Hai are kind of leaderless because of the fact that Zing has legal problems, which we'll be talking about later. Mai Ling shows up. She sees Li Yang talking to them, and they quickly discuss how Feng Hai is going to fill their power vacuum.
Yeah, and they're going to take the three toughest guys, and they're going to fight it out in sort of a round robin tournament. And
she does not like losing Zing.
No,
and his muscle.
No, and again, we're seeing the fracture of the relationship between Mai Ling and Li Yang. And Li Yang, I mean, on this, I'm team Li Yang in this case.
Yeah,
because I see him as more. He's violent, he's tough, but he's more honorable, and I think he has a better sense of. He has more compassion than Mai Ling,
and he's wise.
Even though he's a great fighter, he's also a very smart man too.
Yeah, he's the thinking man's fighter, or the fighting man's thinker, however you want to flip that. And that's why I really like this character so much, because he carries himself with that honor that you described. He doesn't just kind of do honorable things. He has that aura about him, no matter what scene he's in, right?
No, he's not just a thug.
No, and he has people's respect, most importantly, something that Mai Ling probably does not have in full because of who she is and how she got to where she's at. But interestingly, she says, we could have controlled Zing, and Li Yang is like, Zing was out of control. What are you talking about here? But that is it. That's the extent of this scene. And if anything, it further establishes what you said, Mike, which is their relationship is kind of hitting the skids a little bit, simply because he don't like the way she operates.
Yeah, she says to him, say what you will about him, but he kept his tongue under control, and then he responds with, he was out of control.
Right.
And they're both right. They're both right, simultaneously.
Zing is nuts. We know this already. There's no whitewash in that.
Yeah.
All right, next scene. We are at Toys, and it is she and Nellie, and they're doing it.
They're making love.
Yeah, they really are. And it's a pretty tender scene, and it's a pretty hot scene. You got to admit, right? They're both attractive women. And you get about 30 seconds of that before it cuts away to the afterwards.
The afterglow.
Afterglow. There you go. Right. And they start talking. Yeah. Right. And they start talking about their unlikely relationship. Right. Nellie says something about, I never thought I'd spend the night in a Chinese brothel. And Toy, very funny. She's like, you prefer American brothel? So again, there's that little bit of comedy, right, that they write into this show just to make it chuckle while all this other stuff is going on. And then this is where we pick up some of Toy's backstory, which we really don't know much about, Mike.
Yeah, it was so cool how they just they throw in these little nuggets. You're in one scene, and then you get a little bit of their backstory. And apparently her husband, Toy's husband, was a merchant, and he used to do business in America. And he I took him, he was a successful merchant.
Right.
And she came along with him on a business trip. And well, apparently this particular trip, it had a horrible ending. The other guys in the ship, they killed her husband, and they were going to rape her, sexually assault her.
Right.
And the captain came to her rescue.
He stepped in.
Right. And basically to make her his concubine so he could rape her. So he saved her from sexual assault. She said that her husband's body was summarily tossed in the sea. And then she talked about it. She came to America. She lost everything because she was a woman. They took everything from her.
No husband, no deal, they told her. She tried to still do her husband's business, and they were like, we're not doing business with a Chinese lady.
And by the way, on a side note here, related to this, I was just reading a little bit about the history of the Chinese in America.
Yeah.
And there was we've been seeing in the show the ban on Chinese, or the attempt to pass that law.
Yeah.
And basically part of that was that no women from China were allowed. It was just the men. And Chinatown was overrun with men. And in a lot of cases, the men would go back. They would have families. They would have kids, and then come back and wait till maybe their sons got a little older so they could bring them over to America. Right. So there just wasn't a lot of women. And I thought that was interesting. And so that made me think of this anyway.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Good stuff, Mike. Just a quick sidebar is that if if nothing else, I mean, the show's entertaining as hell, but it is in a very large sense educational because I'll be honest with you. I mean, I knew of the Chinese and they were building the railroads and lots of other things in the 1800s, but I certainly did not have any clue about like this aspect of the Chinese immigrant experience. Maybe having grown up on the East Coast, it was a different Chinese experience, and we didn't hear about as much stuff that happened on whatever it was. I feel like I'm much more educated about another part of the American immigrant experience that I didn't know about, even though, I'm aware of a lot of it.
Yeah. And I think, and also my takeaway from the show is that this speaks to the larger immigrant experience, not just the Chinese, but it speaks to even European immigrants or the slaves, unfortunate tragedy of slavery in America. And it speaks to all of them and the bigotry and the racism and the circumstances and how racism in a larger extent, broader picture, it actually does end up hurting everyone. But anyway, I digress.
We digress, and that's all right. But A Toy Story continues here, and she talks more about her husband after she lost her deals and they took everything from her. She talks about how she survived because she was young and pretty. So we know what that insinuates, of course, given our knowledge of her business. But she also mentions another aspect about her, which we already knew. We find the genesis of it, which she says that her husband taught her back in China about buying land and owning real estate. And that's when she tells Nellie about some of the deals she's got going on with Patterson.
Right. And she started to explain how she's losing faith in Patterson or has lost faith in Patterson. She leaves out the part where she's losing faith in it because he's seen her decapitate people. She leaves that little bit out, but that's okay.
Yeah. She forgets to mention that he's scared shitless of her. And that's, but she paints him as just being weak. And I guess, when you cut out all the causes, the final symptom is that he's weak. So
he can't handle a little decapitation,
Yeah. He the ugly side of business is not for this guy apparently, and A Toy doesn't like that, and so I don't know if she's just saying this to continue telling her story or if she's angling for a response. But Nellie does respond in a positive fashion where she says, "I'll be your partner. You don't need a weak ass partner. I'll be your partner."
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing myself. Was A Toy consciously doing this?
Right.
Or was this just pillow talk that just ended up having a different turn? I don't know. I couldn't figure that out. I guess that's up to the interpretation of the viewer in this case.
That's a great question, Mike. There's two sides to that coin, and maybe it was subconscious out of A Toy, but it just feels happened too conveniently. And maybe that's just the writers shortcutting their way quickly here to further this story. But Nellie begins to speak of a future. We could buy more land. We could use that land to help more girls. And then A Toy, maybe her wheels are turning a little because then she asks Nellie to tell her more about that awful brothel that she has been trying to get girls to save girls from.
Yeah, I think the name of it was the Grip brothel.
The Grip. Thank you. Yeah.
And then A Toy says, I mean, Nellie wouldn't realize this, but as the viewer would realize it, she goes, "Show me on a map where they are."
Yeah, because Nellie first tells her that, I can't get in there. It's police protected and there's no shot for us to help any of these girls. And A Toy pulls out the map and says, "Show me where this is." And so we know what that means.
Yeah.
But that's where the scene ends.
And Patterson may know what that would mean if you were there.
That's a good point. Only two people in the show would know would know what that means. That's a good point. We move on now. That's where the scene ends, and we'll find out later on what comes out of that. But now we're back to Father Jun now, kind of in his like exile in another room in Hopway headquarters, and young Jun walks in, and Father Jun says, "I should be dead already." And so I guess that's kind of the way of the tongue, right? When there's a takeover and the head guy is deposed, you don't keep him around. You cut his throat and you move on, I guess.
Yeah. And here again, we see sort of the interplay of the father-son and the business dynamic.
Right.
Because my takeaway from this is that young Jun doesn't have the heart to kill his father, no matter how strained they are.
Right.
And let's face it, patricide, is a heinous crime. So this is where, again, how they combine the business and the personal here. And I thought this was really fascinating because both are really going on. You're seeing it almost like, like when a father and son, as he's raising him, and like, say one day the kid beats his father at sports,
Right.
like he finally outscores his father in basketball. And here's kind of like that moment, but obviously with higher stakes.
Yeah. This was the great Santini up until the opening scene of this episode.
Are you gonna cry? You gonna shed some tears for me?
Exactly. Gonna squirt some tears, punk. But that's exactly what this was, right? And this is where, like, sort of, this is almost like the private, post deposing conversation where Father Jun asks him, "So how long were you planning this takeover?" And the response from young Jun was, "I wasn't planning at all. It just happened." Sort of like our reaction to the scene. It just happened. It literally, they didn't plan on coming back from the tournament and say, "We're going to bust some heads and take this thing." But now we learn further that here that Father Jun doesn't like Assam. He doesn't like him. He doesn't trust him. And that's just how it is.
And he's sort of implying that Assam was kind of pulling the strings.
Right.
And
that's the distrust part.
Yeah. And to go back to when you said about how he said that he should be killed,
Yeah.
I think that young Jun said he doesn't want to kill him, and he kind of basically wants to keep him around as sort of an advisor, a consigliere, if you will.
Yeah, tap into his knowledge and wisdom, understand.
Right, which that serves two purposes. That gets him off the hook for having to kill his father, but I also think it's a really good idea. I mean, in a perfect world, that would, right? I'm sorry, I'm going to reference Godfather again, but right, in the original Godfather, Vito Corleone sort of stepped aside as Michael was ascending, but he sort of became his consigliere, and I think it reminded me of that. I'm sorry, I always reference this.
No, it's a good reference, Mike, and it's the truth. But not only do you say that it gets him off the hook and keeps a wise consigliere around, but Father Jun even says, "Yeah, that's the easy way out, not killing me. Look at you, you're weak, and they're going to think that you're weak, and I should be dead. Everyone expects me to be dead. You don't run things anymore." He pretty much said, and we're not going to be doing it like that. So the scene closes with young Jun saying, "Listen, you don't respect me. I know you don't respect me, but you will."
Right. And he also tells the two guys guarding him at the door, because he knows his father will kill himself. He goes, "Anything happens to him, and I'm going to blame you."
Right. Great scene, heavy duty scene. The true final passing of the baton right there, right?
Yeah.
But obviously Father Jun well aware of the fact that he's done.
Yeah.
We move on now. Here's Penny. She is at her desk, awash in papers, Mike. Sort of her desk almost looks like the desk version of what her factory looks like. There's that much scrap on it.
Good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And in walks Sophie, the trader, trying to make things nice with her.
Yeah, and clearly Sophie is feeling very guilty about about what happened at the factory, and she's being overly nice here.
I mean, ridiculous, like laying it on thick.
Yeah, and this is obviously Sophie looking for some sort of redemption, trying to make amends with her sister without her sister even knowing what happened.
She's trying to absolve herself.
Yeah.
But that never works. As human beings, we know that you can't forgive yourself for something you did to someone else, even if they don't know you did it yet.
Yeah. And once again, we see, as we've seen time and time again, between Blake and Sophie, and once again, she's advising her to just be done with the factory. Just get it out of your hair.
Right. Because Sophie says, and she, as part of her, I guess, internal way of minimizing her actions, she goes, "It's just a factory."
Right. That's an excellent point.
Yeah, but the more she can minimize minimize the asset, the more she can absolve herself of how heavy duty her crime really was against her sister. But Penny fires back and says it was not just a factory; it was freedom. My freedom, your freedom. But now, I'm kind of broke. That's when Sophie's like, "Sell and just go paint, whatever."
Right. And I want to reference something you said a few episodes back, how the show, one of the brilliant things about the show, and kind of subtle, is how the scenes that go back to back sort of mirror each other. In the previous scene, we saw the familiar relationship between father and son. Now we're seeing the the relationship between sisters. And so there's a family dynamic to these two scenes. I thought that was really, and I thought about what you said on that one.
Yeah, this show does that a lot, and there's several running themes in this one, which we'll get to as they reveal themselves. But at this point, Penny's kind of had enough of Sophie's yap and says, "Just leave me alone." Right? And Sophie leaves. It's really not much she can do. Now here's Bill in court. It's Zing's trial, and he is testifying about the great police work he did in them finding Zing, in finding the sword, in finding corroborating evidence in that watch that Zing allegedly had, which belonged to McCormick, I believe it was, that was murdered by a toy back in the thing Patterson saw a few episodes back.
Yeah.
And of course, the judge commends Bill on his bravery, and that's kind of the extent of the scene for now. It's just a quick testimony.
Well, but we see a quick shot of Leary in the courtroom too.
Yes, Leary is there in the back watching the proceedings. He's got a vested interest in all of this, doesn't he?
He does.
Yeah,
he does.
Yeah. So it's getting very interesting, Mike.
Yeah, this really seems more about it. This seems more about just establishing. It's an establishment scene because there's not too much here, but we're going to come back to this.
Just letting us know, hey, Zing's trial. They talked about earlier the replacement for Zing. Here's an update on Zing, and it's really quick. But I got a feeling we're going to see this scenery again soon.
I also just want to point out too that Zing had a sort of a bemused look on his face, that he was sort of like. He had like a wry expression, like really.
Yeah, he's not being meek in any way. No. He's not being overly obnoxious in any way, but he's certainly like the viewer. I think he represents the viewer here because we know the real deal in a sense with his arrest and this whole frame job, and he ain't buying this shit. He's the only one that ain't, because he's got that.
Well, Bill also ain't buying this shit either, but that's a different topic.
But Bill's the seller, so it doesn't matter if he's buying it or not. We now move out of court, and we're back to Hopway headquarters, and it's young Jun and Assam. And they start sharing a drink, and they're kind of chilling. It's kind of a quiet, pensive moment. And they have a quickie conversation about Vega real quick.
Well, just before that, actually, I just want to say, because there was a funny line here that I got a kick out of in this scene.
What was that?
I don't know if you caught it, because young Jun turns around and goes, "Man, the old man was a real motherfucker, wasn't he?" And this Assam says, "Well, in your case, he literally fucked your mother."
yes, I did write that one down. I was laughing, and then I had to move on. Good one, man. Again, funny show. And then that's when young Jun says, "You thinking about Vega, a little bit," and kind of nods his head, and they
and then Assam says, just sort of brushes it off with "the life we chose," and then young Jun counters back with another good line. He goes, "I don't know about you, but no one gave me a choice."
No one gave me a choice, right? Exactly. And then they talk about what just went down.
Right.
He says, "Man, it really happened so fast."
Right. And then here, let me know if I'm jumping too far ahead here, because I think the seed that was planted from an earlier scene kind of comes to fruition here.
Was that
as when young Jun says to Assam, he goes, "Sometimes I feel like I'm working for you."
Yeah, not quite what he says. First off, Assam says something to him like, "Hey, man, I'm the boss's right hand," right? And then they kind of credit each other. And Assam's because you made that opium deal happen. That happened under your watch, Assam says to young Jun. And young Jun says, "Yeah, but that was all your connections that made that happen." And he goes, "And I work for you." And then that's when young Jun responds with, "Doesn't always feel that way." Kind of semi under his breath a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And you wonder now, Father Jun get in his head? Did he already have that feeling? Assam doesn't quite catch that. He's like, "What was it?" And he goes, nothing, man. I'm just still wired up or whatever.
Yeah.
This is a funny ending here to a scene where young Jun gets up and says, "Hey, man, I'm going to go rest up before the council meeting. That ought to be a shit show."
But it's your shit show.
Exactly. And then end scene there. Pretty interesting, Mike, that it makes you wonder now, does young Jun has a portion of the distrust of Assam also transferred over to young Jun along with the power?
I think so.
He trusted him until a minute ago.
Yeah, until that conversation with his father in the previous scene.
The man just won a tournament, risking his life to make things right.
Yep.
Which is directly why young Jun's in charge. But yet here's young Jun now already externally verbalizing more of that doubt you pointed to earlier, where he said, I hope so. They were both very similarly uttered under their breath, almost under his breath. Crazy, heavy scene for as small as it is.
Yeah.
We're back in court now, and it's time for Zing to hear his verdict. And I had to chuckle here where the judge, and I don't know if this was on purpose or it was just ignorance, to just make sure that they just refuse to get the guy's name right. And he goes, I sentence you, John Chinaman, also known as the swordsman, also known as Ching.
Yeah.
Not Zing, but Ching. And you could see Zing still got that look on his face that you described. I find you guilty of murder. And based on how heinous your crimes are, you are going to be sentenced to death by hanging.
Yeah. Yep. And he's let out of the courtroom, and he never kind of loses that wry expression.
No,
almost like he knows something we don't, or whatever. But
well, he knows something everybody else in the room doesn't know, except for Bill.
Yeah.
Right. That's for sure.
He and Bill are the only ones in the room that know the real deal.
Yeah. And as Zing is being let out, they lock eyes for a moment. There's a moment where they lock eyes. And then that kind of ends. He's let out. As you pointed out, Leary's there. And that's where Leary and Bill have a quick little chat as well.
Yeah. And Leary kind of says, he sort of says, I was worried about you. I heard you're under the thumb of that guy, under the thumb of the Feng Hai.
I heard you were in that chink's back pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bill kind of uncomfortably says, no, I was undercover. I just did it just to nail him.
Yeah. And I got close to him so I could nail him, which I did.
Yeah. And
go ahead.
And Leary says, oh yeah, that's what I thought it was. But I get the sense Leary's not quite convinced, which in case let's reference back, that really in a sense makes Bill guilty of the same sin as Damon, right?
Exactly. Exactly. We've said that he's just Damon's replacement in every way. But
and now Leary knows it.
Yeah, and now Leary knows it. And, Bill denies, right? He throws that little misdirection, the same bullshit he fed Lee, the same bullshit he fed his wife, two other people who weren't buying it. And now he tries to feed it to Leary, and Leary doesn't buy it. His whole, oh, yeah, I thought there was something like that. That wasn't convincing at all. Bill's been selling, and the people that know him best do not buy.
Right.
Yeah. All right. We are out of that scene, and it's now outdoors. I guess it's post-trial now, and it's the mayor, the blowhard himself, commending Bill and the police in public. Key to the city kind of scenery here, Mike, where they commend everybody for their hard work in capturing the swordsman.
Yeah, and the mayor is giving a speech. He's commending all the policemen. He's not remembering their names. He has to turn to O'Hara, who's giving him the names, and just kind of speaking to the mayor's overall ignorance, and how he's just an empty suit, really, at the end of the day. And now he's giving this speech, and this is like just an admiration society for O'Hara and all his good police work.
That's all that this is. It has no real bearing on the advancement of the, needs or desires of the people of San Francisco, other than closing the door on this sordid swordsman case so that all the white people can relax now and know that the guy who was threatening their well-being with his sword, the horrible Chinaman, is now behind bars. As the mayor continues to blah, 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 and we can still hear him in the background. You got Leary and Buckley now having a conversation. And this one's a very interesting chat, Mike.
Yeah. Buckley is he's approaching, and Leary's basically calling him. He goes, wow, congratulations, you caught one guy. There's about 20,000 of them. Well,
there's some lead into that line first, Mike, which was first thing is Leary says to Buckley, does the mayor ever take a fucking breath? because like I said, you could just keep hearing him blah 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 in the background, right? And Buckley, I don't know if Buckley's kind of tongue in cheek here, but he goes, but it's a big day for him. You should be happy as well. We captured the swordsman, and that's when Leary says to him, "You catch one fucking chink, and you want to throw a fucking parade."
Very blunt.
You got 25,000 more to go, he says.
Yeah. Very blunt. And this conversation kind of takes an interesting turn, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, because Leary's just right back to his own agenda, right? And he flips it right off of, we captured the swordsman too. My men need to be working.
Yeah.
And Buckley takes the conversation somewhere else now.
Yeah, and Buckley's basically says, you have political capital. You can control how these Irish workers will vote. And Leary just scoffs. He goes, "I'm no politician." He spits on the ground.
And I'm no fucking politician.
Yeah.
And then he takes off.
And Buckley says, almost under his breath, too, like we've seen before, he goes, all the great ones always say that, or all the true good ones always say
that.
That's
what the best ones always say.
That's what he says. Okay.
There's the line. But Leary, he brings the point, Mike, and it's true. And obviously Leary has never considered this aspect of his strength that he wields in the community, which is that these Irishmen all look to him for guidance in the ways of what's going on in San Francisco. And he certainly could control a massive block of votes and essentially determine outcomes of future elections. But he doesn't quite see it at that moment. Buckley, however, you got to put him lump him in that group of characters, Mike, that we've described that are playing a long game here. And Buckley's one of them. So this is something that he has been looking for an opportunity, I think, to put out there. And now he's done it for Leary.
Yeah.
All right. We get out of that scene and more business. It's Toy, and she is with Patterson, and she's breaking up with him. I mean, she is, right? She's breaking up their business arrangement.
Yeah, she's sort of giving him the "it's not you, it's me" speech.
yeah. She's saying stuff like, we did good for each other, we made good money, and you could see him already like, well, what do you mean? Like, what is this about? Like, I thought things were going good, and she's being pretty cool about it, as she is as a character in this show. She's a very cool character, and she's just like, no problem, we stay on good terms, no reason not to, because again, he knows she slices heads off.
Yeah. But I also get the sense that he doesn't want this to end for a personal reason, because he's sort of giving her when an indebted gambler says, "I just need more time, just give me some more time to get, I need a little time."
Well, and he explains that he used his position in those properties to take out other loans and leverage those properties. So, which is not in the deal. When you have a partner and you don't take out loans against a property that you don't own in full. So now he's got to figure out now how to get the money back into those properties so that he can then turn them over to a Toy who he knows could finish him off if he doesn't deliver. So this is where, you can see again, just, how scared and weak he is, but he also realizes that this is also it for him, right? A lot of people having reckonings in this episode. So Patterson leaves, and he says something along the lines of, "I'll have this for you by the end of the week," or something like that.
Yeah, and the Toy kind of very low-key threatens him, because he says to her, he goes, "You can trust me, right?" And she says, "I do. Do you?" Or something like that. And it's a line that said in any other context wouldn't be a threat, but her body language, her expression, it's a threat. And given her history with blades, it's a threat.
Yeah, so she's doing it in a way that can't be outwardly proven as a threat, right? But because of what he knows, he understands that there's a consequence here should his fraud now prevent her from getting her deeds.
Right.
And that's the end of that. All right. That scene ends right there. and we are back to the Banshee, back brawler Leary in the ring, and he's he's kicking ass. The scene opens with him fighting with a little bit of swagger there in the first couple of moments.
Well, he's among the best fighters in the show, so why not? He's
right.
He knows what he can do.
Putting on an exhibition.
Right. But then he gets distracted, doesn't he?
Yeah, because Sophie shows up. Everybody's favorite turncoat, Sophie, is here. And he does get distracted. And what happens when you get distracted in a fight, Mike?
You might take a few bruises. And you might take a few punches.
So he gets popped. He gets popped in the face. A pretty good shot too. He takes from that guy, but that only wakes him up out of his little funk that he was in for a moment when he saw her.
Yeah, and he finishes the guy off, and then we see him with Sophie. Right? Yeah, finishes no problem. He's still Leary after all.
Right.
So after that, we see him and Sophie together. And they have a really interesting conversation. I think this sort of peels the layers back on Leary a little bit because Sophie's expressing her regret about the explosion.
Before she expresses the regret, right? They're inside the Banshee now. The fight's over and they're inside the Banshee talking. He says to her, "I didn't think you'd come back."
Mm.
So, Leary figured that after what she had done, that she wouldn't be able to live with herself nor want to see him again either, with guilt and everything else. Because remember, Leary warned her before, turning against your people, that's a tough thing to do. So he figured that was over for them. But she says no. She comes back anyway, doesn't she? She says, "I couldn't stay away."
Yeah, it does the heart good to see true love.
Yeah, right. And then this is where the regret part you're talking about. They start discussing Penny, right? Yeah. And he asks her, do you have any regrets?
And she does, and then she sort of brings it back to him. She goes, "Do you have any regrets?" And he says, "That's why I drink."
Why do you think I drink?
Right. Why do you think I drink? And
it's a really weird scene in a sense there, where he also, this is where I found it very interesting, Mike. I paused for a minute because I needed to process what it was and how he said it to her. But remember, she's internalizing this self-redemption thing going on, right? And Leary says something to her that almost helps that along, where she's talking about Penny and the factory and how she probably wasn't even really happy there. And then Leary says, "Well, then we did her a favor," or something along those lines, didn't we?
He said, "You said yourself that she wasn't happy there." So yeah.
He's
rationalizing it too. I don't know if it's probably not for him. He's doing it for her. I don't think Leary is really going to feel that way.
Right, exactly. But what he says to her helps along her internal self redemption, which was, she tried to say earlier, it's just a factory, and that doesn't help minimize it to Penny. No. But when he says, "Well, she didn't like it anyway, we did her a favor." Oh yeah, you're right. We did her a favor, right? This is where the conversation now flips, and she asks Leary if he ever tires of the violence, right? Are you tired of violence? And he says it's a way to get things done. But then he tells her about the conversation with Buckley.
And she backs Buckley. She agrees with Buckley.
In a way, she does.
She says she's right. She goes, she says, "You have political capital."
That's right. And somehow here, you feel like she cares about him. And that, I noticed it at that point. And my thought in my head was, during that moment, where I was like, why does she care about him? And then literally, as I thought that, he says to her, "What did I do to deserve you?" Right? And then they kiss, and that's kind of where that scene ends, Mike. But an interesting scene nonetheless, because we find that the bond between Leary and Sophie has not been broken, despite the, shattering of the family dynamic that has happened for Sophie. She's still drawn to this guy. There's going to be consequences further. New scene: Assam and Chow. Assam is at Chow's, and he is placing an order for the tong. Some knives, some hatchets, and other hardware, as Chow calls it. And he says that's a lot of hardware. Almost like he's going to war.
Yeah, this was a good scene too, and I always love whenever Chow's there. Chow's one of my favorite characters,
Yeah.
and the exchange between him and Assam, and then here again another theme is emerging in this scene. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but they both are kind of, and I'm not going to jump too far, but you see how they're both kind of calling each other out because they're asking each other questions. I'm not sure where you are in the scene yet, so I don't want to. Again, I don't want to.
Well, we're at the point here where the first thing they do is start talking about Father Jun being out.
Right.
Right. That's where the conversation begins and leads down the path that you're alluding
Right.
to, right? But it begins with them saying Father Jun's out, and then they start talking about young Jun's ascension here now to the top, right? And Chow here is very smart, wise, where he understands too that, and he says it as much to Assam, that Father Jun knows that it's kind of over for him now.
And then he gives a little bit of Father Jun's backstory, which is where I referenced earlier, because he says he was here when this place was nothing. He goes, and now it's a city within a city.
Right. An outpost for Chinese laborers back in the day.
Yeah,
and
and that's all it was. But he also he says something interesting, which is a theme that's been recurring in this episode. He kind of points out that, was saying without saying, that Assam might be the power behind the throne. And that was really interesting because that's the theme of this episode that is emerging, is that more than one person has referenced that Assam is the real power in the Tong.
That's another theme going on here, right? And this is where Assam kind of turns the conversation back on to Chow. And like you said, right, they start calling each other out in ways that are very sort of sly or coy without calling each other out. So he says, you have something to do with Zing?
Yeah.
And Chow,
he basically admits it.
In a way.
Yeah.
Without saying it.
Yeah.
And then this is where the episode of the title of the episode comes in, where Chow says, my father used to say that if you wait by the river long enough, the bodies of your enemies will float by. And Assam's response was, I think Sun Tzu said that.
Yeah, and then the Chow, I'm not going to do it justice because it was funny, not the line, but the way he delivered. He goes something like, among others. Look, he very quickly transitions out of that. Like, all right, you call me on my bullshit, but okay, look, let's move on.
Right. But this is where now Assam starts to receive more advice. People love to give him advice, but Chow's giving it in a different way now. And he says, the only certainty here is uncertainty.
Right.
He says to Assam. And he suggests to Assam that he be careful.
Work behind the lines, work in the shadows.
Work in the shadows, right? You're a survivor. I'm telling you this because you're a survivor. And in the shadows is survival. He tries to explain to him that you don't need to be out front. You don't need to be that top guy. And again, that whole underlying theme of people are suspecting Assam as a puppet master here in many ways is not lost on Chow either.
Everyone knows, or at least the key players know.
That's right. And at some point, Chow says to Assam, I forget what it was he said to him now, and it was really important. I hope you have this. But he says something to him, and Assam's response was, I'm going to make sure to let young Jun know that. And Chow's response was, but I'm telling it to you. I'm not telling it to young Jun. Like, again, an acknowledgement of Assam's power.
Yeah. That's what he said flat out.
Yeah.
Flat out. And young Jun knows, and Father Jun knows, and now Chow knows. And I would imagine probably like a Toy probably knows too, because they're among the smartest characters on the show. So
right.
And it's, at the same time, Assam is uncomfortable. But I'm wondering, is Assam uncomfortable because he's not sure of it, or is he uncomfortable that people know it?
I don't think Assam is outwardly or consciously trying to pull the strings, although he's got his vendetta against Mai Ling, right? So really, his guiding force is that hatred and anger towards her. So whether he's pulling them outwardly or inwardly, like subconsciously, he's steering where the ship is going in certain ways, no matter whether he realizes it or not. And that's where he decides to get the hell out of there. He's had enough of this conversation. I don't think he can take the gravity of really what's happening in this power shift that's occurring, Mike. And that's when Chow closes it out with, let young Jun know that I'm at his service.
As well as yours.
Unbelievable, Mike. How it's like, it feels like it's becoming, it's almost like there's two bloodless takeovers happening in a way, right? There was no bloodshed in the beginning episode, and there's been none now as Assam sort of shifts his way into being the power in the shadows.
A bloodless coup.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, scene shifts now, and we're obviously in that nasty brothel, the Grip, right? Yeah. And it's just freaking filthy. It's abhorrent. It's squalid. The treatment of the girls is just absolutely, it's the worst thing you ever saw. It was an uncomfortable, it's an uncomfortable scene to watch as you see kind of like the filth. And I'm talking about the physical filth as well as the men in there that are filth.
Yeah, and the girls are all, they're all working again. They're against their will. It's a sexual assault.
It's slavery.
It's slavery. It's sexual assault. It's horrifying. Yeah.
It's an unbelievable scene. And, there's we see an overhead shot so you can kind of get a full picture of the goings on in this hellhole without too much super detail. They get detailed in one or two quick moments, but before it can sink in, Toy shows up sneaking in herself, and she's got a big sword. Oh, and she's got a helper in the form of Lie. And we know why they're there. We knew this was going to happen. Show me where.
Yeah, and they're freeing the girls. And this scene is not much to say here because it's all just pure action. But this scene was really, it was altruistic. They're there just to get the girls. They're on a mission. Yeah, they're on a mission to help the girls. It's a positive scene from a very violent scene, but it's positive. It's violent and positive.
Mike, they just start slicing and dicing every guy in that place. And Lie is just this super confident fighter, man. I mean, she got the one dude up against the bars of the cell, and she smashes his mouth into one of the bars, or smashes his mouth into the sword, and then smashes his face into the bar. And she's pretty much just like toying with him. Like if you ever watch those like National Geographics where like the lion will play with the gazelle it's going to eat in a couple of minutes before it eats it, that's what she's doing. She's playing with this guy and really extending his torture until a toy shows up and tells her to just finish him off already.
Yeah.
And she finishes him all right.
Yeah. Like I said, this scene was pretty much direct. It was just all about violence to rescue these girls. And it was a good analogy about the lion and the gazelle. But I also got the sense, too, that maybe Lie, she seemed a little bit extra intense. So I wondered maybe there was something alluded to in her backstory that, set her off in this scene. That's sort of what I was wondering. Like, what is Lie's backstory? I hope we find out.
She could have just killed that guy with a slice through wherever she could have chosen, but
this was personal.
Yeah, she took it very personal, this specific murder or whatever you want to call it, just justified killing. But that is where the scene ends, right? The girls are walking out with Atoy and with Lie. They're being led, basically, literally freed from chains. And another kind of overhead shot, Mike, where you can see the dead, you can see the blood, you can see the squalor. And then it's still the same scene, but it goes from night into day in a sense. And now the cops are there surveying exactly what they see, and they don't like it.
No, this is a problem for them.
Yeah, big time problem.
Because now they have the swordsman, so to speak, is still on the run, and everyone's going to be like, "Hey, we thought you captured that guy. What happened?"
That's just it, right? They're looking around, and the first thing one of them says is, "It looks like death by sword to me." Did we get the wrong guy, Bill? It sure seems that way, and they realize it.
And what I like about this too, because it brings you back to the earlier scenes, like where the mayor is singing his praises. And it's how it's all public. Everyone's saying how great a cop Bill is, and he's cleaned up our streets. And here, not more than a heartbeat after Zing is sentenced to death, it's happening again.
And one of the cops says, "Oh my God." The line's escaping me. It was a good one too. As they're surveying, one of the cops says to Bill, "Jesus," and they just gave us the fucking key to the city. This is where one of the other cops on scene puts it all together, right?
Yeah.
He puts it all together and he says to Bill, "It sure looks to me, Bill, like you got the wrong guy and you're going to have a Chinese swordsman problem on your hands here again. But if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of cut bait and get out of this situation, and I'll keep my mouth shut at a price."
Yeah, he says, "I can forget what I saw here." And then Bill very coyly says, "Okay, what's your price?" And he asks him, given all the pull you have now and how you're celebrated, I'd like you to recommend me for sergeant.
Right. And Bill thinks for about half a second and says, "You got it."
Yeah.
And off that guy goes. And then Bill turns to them and says, "Let's clean this up," which obviously means cover it up.
Yeah.
And that's the end of it. One of the things was, "Hey, where are the girls?" And the cop said, "There's nobody here except the bodies." So it's too much of a mystery for them and too much of a messy scene for them. And it's just easier to get rid of the bodies and pretend it never happened and hope that that other guy gets promoted to sergeant.
Yep.
Crazy, Mike. This story just keeps twisting and turning. All right. We now shift scenes again. And it's Mai Ling with her private eye.
Nichols.
He's back. What's his name? Nichols.
Yeah, Nichols.
Yeah, he's back from his mission. Remember, a couple episodes back when they were in the horse-drawn carriage, he said he needed to take a trip. So he's back from that trip, and they're sitting at the table, and I got to say, he's eating.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like he's like annoyingly eating. I don't know, as if like he hasn't eaten in like 7 days or something. Like he's making noises, he's talking with his mouth full, he's stuffing his face. Even weirdly enough, is he's eating, but Mai Ling's not. And I always find that weird when two people are at a table and one is like watching the other one eat. I don't know. It was just kind of a weird dynamic as he's presenting the information. And she's looking at a photograph.
And we're not.
Right. We don't see the picture. We only see the back of it. But he tries to, they try to allude here somehow.
Yeah. That something happened to Buckley and he had a wife and now he doesn't have a wife.
Pretty much. And he asks her while she's looking at the picture, he says, "You know what you're looking at there?" And she says, "I do." And he also says, "Then you know how much it's worth or what it's worth." So really, at this point, we're like, what's on this photograph, Mike?
Yeah, and they're teasing us.
They really are. And then Lee Young shows up just to kind of close the scene. And they don't say a word to each other. More of the fracturing, more indicativeness of the fracturing of the relationship, Mike.
Yep.
We move on from there. Another quick establishing scene, in a sense, Mike. We're outside in San Francisco somewhere here, and Penny is out and about, and she spots Merriweather, the guy that tried to buy her factory like episodes and episodes ago. And now she wants to sell. She's a motivated seller.
Well, I thought she was just they didn't really say what they were talking about, because I got the sense that she was trying to strike a deal for herself.
Well, she did, but she said, "Is your offer still on the table?" Remember, he offered to buy the factory from her.
Okay, then I guess I misunderstood the scene. All right, I took it as she wanted to. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, let me ask you this then: what other offer would she be talking about that we're aware of, other than that they shared a scene where he said, "I'll buy your factory," and she said, "It's not for sale"?
I got the sense that there's something here that we're not going to know about yet, but that Penny is going to maintain the factory. Again, they're sort of teasing us like with a photograph. There's something we don't know about yet.
Well, from the surface, all we know about is that he tried to buy the factory from her.
Yeah.
A couple different times. All All right. Now the scene shifts. That was literally, we spent more time on that scene, Mike, than the scene took, to tell you the truth. We're back now to Mr. Patterson, Atoy's now soon to be former business partner, and he's in confession. He's in confession and he says, Father, forgive me. And the priest says, no, it's Father, bless me. So he like corrects him. I don't know confession. Like that's not
because he's not a Catholic.
And he's obviously not a Catholic, right? So he doesn't know how to do it.
Right.
So now it makes you wonder then, what's he doing in there?
And he says he's looking for some help.
And the priest says, I can help. He says, I think he said something like, I have money issues. I may be in a fraud situation. He does say some certain things. He goes, and I need some help. And the priest says that he can help.
But he wants an offering.
Yeah, this is where Patterson, again, his like confusion about how to behave in the confessional. Now we're starting to realize goes much farther than just I'm not a Catholic, because something else is going on in here, Mike. This guy's not here to absolve sins with a give me 10 Hail Marys, 3 Our Fathers, and off you go, laddie. Right? That's not what's going on here.
Well, but let me do a digress here and a deep dive in history just for a moment briefly and speak to in the old days of the church, how people were literally buying their way into heaven.
Right.
And I'm sure you heard about this, and this was, where the Lutherans split from the Catholics. That in the old days, rich people, no matter what they did, they would pay off a priest and say, your seat in heaven is assured. And this reminded me of that. He wasn't buying a seat in heaven, obviously, but he was buying something.
Like Paulie in The Sopranos. What about all that stuff I bought? How am I not guaranteed to go to heaven now? And the priest was like, Paulie, this is, after he saw the visions of the dead haunting him. But it's the same thing here. He says, you make an offering, cash, the priest says. And then like Patterson starts emptying his pockets in a sense, because he's putting bills, he's putting coins, he's putting whatever he's got on him. And this is where the scene ends. And I wrote down, what's he paying for exactly?
Indeed.
So there's some, to take it to the streets vernacular, there's some nefarious shit going on in that confessional, Mike. And I just can't put my finger on what it is. But that's where the scene ends. And, we go from one partner, Patterson, to the other partner, Atoy, back in Sonoma now with the new girls, fresh off of the stagecoach. And Nellie is there to greet everybody, and that's when they start talking.
Yeah, and Atoy is explaining to the girls that you can trust her, you'll be safe here, you'll learn to farm, this will be a better life for you. And she says you can trust this white woman in case they had any hesitations.
Kind white lady, as she put her. Kind. She made sure to say kind.
Yeah. And they go off, but then something else happens in this scene, because you see Atoy speak briefly with Nellie, and they sort of, they have a sort of a warm grasp of the arm, and then Nellie goes off with the other girls, but then it's Atoy and Lai.
Right. Lai is over by the stagecoach over there where they unloaded the girls, and this is where we find out very quickly what they were talking about. Right.
And Atoy says to Lai, you too, you're staying here as well. She goes, you're going to get a new life. She goes, and Lai doesn't want to go. She wants to stay with Atoy.
She climbs back into the climbs right back into the cart.
They're struggling. She does some sort of half punches at Atoy, and Atoy says, look, you want to stay with me? You work tonight if you stay with me. She lays it all on the line. You're going to be working as a working girl.
Yeah.
Do you want that?
Seeing John's tonight, she said.
Yeah. He goes, you want that? So Lai sort of very hesitantly agrees. She doesn't even really agree. She just sort of stays there.
She doesn't agree. She fights. She cries. They sort of hug, and then they part. Atoy gets in the carriage, and they start driving off. You can see Lai in the background. Atoy is crying as well. It's a very emotional parting for the two of them. Atoy knows that she's doing the best for this kid, whereas the kid just wants to be with Atoy because Atoy has shown her kindness where no one else ever did.
Right.
Atoy even pulls her hood over herself so that I guess the driver can't really see her crying. But that is the end of the scene. Another heavy duty scene here. We cut away now, and it's Mr. Lee. And he is in his policeman's responsibilities and duties of the day. He is visiting with a woman who we quickly surmise is the McCormick widow. and Lee is returning the watch to her. That was the evidence that sealed Zing's fate.
We haven't seen too much of Lee in this episode, but this scene is pretty pivotal because it sets us up because she explains to him how she didn't even realize the watch was missing until O'Hara pointed it out, and so then Lee kind of quickly puts together. You see, at least in his head, that he's putting together that something's not right here.
Well, she mentions that she mentions about Bill having been there, and Lee first quizzically, he's like, "Wait a minute, I don't understand. Sergeant O'Hara came to see you last week," and she says yes, and then that's when
he started
the smartest cop on the show starts putting it together.
Yeah,
and that's where that scene ends. Again, a lot of really cool quickie scenes in this episode, little shorties that
but pivotal.
Mean a lot. Yeah, they mean a lot here, man. And we got another one right here. Patterson again. We're back to Patterson again. And now he's at a butcher shop. And he walks in there. Again, he's just as hesitant walking into the butcher shop as he was inside the confessional. Right. So that's still carrying over. He's like weakening as this episode goes on. And he says, the guy says, we're closing. The butcher, he's like cleaning up, sloshing water all over the place to clean up. And Patterson says, I'm not here for meat.
He goes, I'm a friend.
In the wrong place.
Yeah. He says, I forget the priest name. He goes, I'm a friend of Father
Hurley.
Father Hurley. And then another guy comes out, and they both look very menacing. They're covered in blood, and they obviously have the tools of a butcher. And
how is a good father these days? The other guy says. And you're right, Mike. These guys are intimidating. They're huge. They're covered in blood. They don't look like they have all their screws about them either.
No, they don't look like Downton Abbey fans. No, they are very menacing, very imposing, and then one of them finally breaks the tension. Goes, well, any friend of Father Hurley's is a friend of ours.
Yeah, crazy, man. And Patterson's bowels can relax at least for a moment. What a crazy scene. It almost reminded me, not in any exact way, but in the weirdness factor, right? Like this is a weird setup. Like we're in this like 1880 butcher shop, right? And there obviously now we got a hint of what's going on here, right? It's murder for hire over here. It reminded me of that scene in The Sopranos where they went to hire those old guys, the DiMaggio brothers. That weird scene where they were hiring those guys to commit the hit on Johnny Sack. It just kind of felt like the same sort of weirdo dynamic. Like this isn't your like everyday, killer, so to speak.
Yeah,
crazy scene, man. Crazy scene. All right, we leave that scene, and we're now back at Long Z headquarters, and it's Lee Young and Mai Ling, and they're doing it.
Yeah, we had 2 sex scenes in this episode. Imagine that.
Hey, double the fun for your money.
But we see here it's a power play.
Yeah, well, the power's established quickly, Mike, because she's on top.
Yeah.
Which
that's sort of a visual demonstration of that.
Absolutely,
say.
it is literal. And it is, what's that word?
Figurative.
Thank you.
Yeah. And she proceeds to, she's choking him, and then she ties something around his neck.
Yeah. Did she? Let me ask you, okay? Because it happened pretty quickly. Did she tie it around his neck, or was it already around his neck?
I thought, I'd have to watch it again, but I thought she put it around his neck.
Either way, he's now wearing a collar. And I thought he was wearing the collar the whole time, right? But at this point, he's holding her arm because the collar's getting like a little tighter or something. Like she's yanking on a little bit, and he's holding her arm. And this is where she says to him, it's like she's putting his loyalty to a test here, Mike. Where she says to him, trust me or don't. And he lets go of her arm. But she's still riding him. She's yanking the collar tighter and tighter. And she's still riding him. And the scene blacks out. And this is what I wrote down. Did she just autoerotic asphyxiate him? Is that what just happened?
And that's what I think happened. Yeah, because he grunted like,
What a crazy scene.
yeah,
And, you know, this is my probably third time watching the episode. And I don't think it ever registered quite the way this scene did this time around. I don't know why, but it was pretty wild. And that scene now goes away. Again, another quickie, right? Bang,
yeah.
bang, bang.
So to speak.
What's that?
A quickie, so to speak.
Literally quickies all over the place. And now we are back now. We see the mayor. It looks like they're in that businessmen's club where they have drinks, that private bar over there. And the mayor's blowharding, as usual, to the businessmen. And they start debating the value of the various labors available to them, let's say.
Yeah, the Irish and the Chinese. And Merriweather's in this room too.
Yeah, Merriweather is in the room. He is there, and he's speaking up against the mayor here, isn't he? He's being very forceful.
Yeah. And he's basically lamenting how necessary Chinese labor is and how it's good for their bottom line.
And important to keeping everybody in business.
Yeah.
Keeps the city afloat was the words he used. Chinese labor keeps the city afloat. And a mayor that doesn't recognize that could be out of a job, he says. So now another threat.
But now Blake is he's smug in this scene.
Who is Merriweather?
No, Blake.
Okay.
Blake is a little smug, but he's about to get taken down a notch.
Yeah, he is, because somebody says something about gosh, he gets insulted. They start insulting him. It's like go back to your wife because it seems like she's running the city anyway, something like that.
Yep.
And a variety of chuckles from the background from the peanut gallery.
Yep.
And the mayor's smug expression quickly dissipates, doesn't it?
Yep.
Oh,
because kind of like almost like with Assam and young Jun, how young Jun sort of being undermined by other people saying, well, implying that Assam is the real power. The same thing's happening to Mayor Blake here with Penny, really, if you think about it.
Yeah, and we know that the mayor is a puppet anyway, but essentially, or mostly from Buckley, right? But in a way, Penny does pull some strings, or at least flaunts going against what his wishes are by employing Chinese labor. And the guys mentioned that. The business people mentioned the fact that, your wife hires Chinese labor and, all these kinds of things. So the mayor essentially leaves, or this scene ends with the mayor being mocked, being laughed at, and being in a position that he certainly can't like being in.
No.
It's crazy. It's crazy how this scene is turning. And you wonder now, maybe, Mike, you make a point. Merriweather's smugness here, and not smugness, excuse me, Merriweather's forcefulness in pushing the mayor and calling him out in front of other people makes me now wonder what you were saying about, is there something more to that little chat we saw her have with Penny, right? Is that connected, his behavior towards the mayor directly now connected to that? And now you turned me a little. I'm starting to feel like you're onto something there. But that's where the scene ends, over, and we're now back outdoors. It's Leary and Sophie. It's a little rainy and drizzly out there, and they're walking. He's walking her home, I guess, or partially home.
Yep. But then they run into Penny.
Well, that's not exactly how it happened. First, she says to Leary, "Are you ever going to walk me all the way home?" And he goes, "This is kind of where this ends." And they say goodbye, and he leaves, turns to leave. Sophie turns, and who's standing there?
There's Penny.
She witnesses them walking together. Now, if Officer Lee on the duck side of the ledger is one of the smartest people in the room, Penny's one of the next smartest people in the room. So when she saw those two together, did it take long for her to do the simple math, Mike?
Nope.
And it didn't take Sophie long to realize that she did the simple math. Oh,
yep.
God, she says.
And now a chain of events is starting to unfold.
Holy mackerel, Mike. I mean, so the scene shifts, right? We're back at home, Penny.
Right.
Sophie's there. And she tries to talk, but Penny's not having it. Nope. She immediately tells Sophie, get out of my house.
And Sophie counters with, no, is it really your house?
Don't you mean his house?
Yeah, don't you mean his house?
She's always, even when she's the wrongest anyone has been on this episode, she's still a dick. I mean, honestly, what purpose does taking that last shot at your sister, who rightfully just tossed you out on your ass, what purpose does that last shot serve?
And she was lucky, that's all.
Other than to validate Penny's decision, right?
And she was lucky, that's all that Penny did to her, because Penny could have rightfully had her arrested, by the way. But
exactly, right? She's doing her a favor by telling her to just take off. So Sophie leaves, presumably to go pack her stuff. And in comes an angry and drunk mayor. And they start arguing. And it's obvious he's drunk. And this is where we start learning some stuff.
Yeah. The mayor is, he's obviously, that conversation with Merriweather has had him more shaken up.
It stung, Mike. It stung.
It stung. Yeah. It stung. And he says to Penny, he goes, I've had it indulging you with your factory.
With your fantasies.
With your fantasies.
And he tells her she's selling.
Yeah. Which again brings me back to the initial conversation with Merriweather and what deal was she making? Because obviously she still has the business.
Yeah, obviously, right? I mean, we're only probably hours later after that Merriweather conversation, and only probably an hour after Merriweather just mocked the shit out of him in the businessman's club, right?
Right.
So when he tells her, though, I'm through with your misguided fantasy or whatever, she says, then divorce me. Then just divorce me.
And he laughs.
And he laughs, and then he responds in another way.
Well, is this the part where, yeah, he
slaps her.
He slaps her, but then he's immediately apologetic about it.
Yeah.
But now Penny's fired up, and now we have a domestic situation brewing here.
Yeah, because he slaps her, immediately regrets it, and then she's like, "Screw that," and she punches him.
You know what I noted in this scene? You know, we've seen such well choreographed fight scenes and such fantastic fight scenes, and now we have these two scrapping, as it were. It's nothing choreographed. Well, I'm sure it was choreographed, but it's nothing. It's not visually.
There's nothing artistic about this battle.
No, and obviously we don't condone men hitting women, but you know this scene just doesn't. You know, it's not the type of violence we're used to on this show.
No, and it's uncomfortable as well because it depicts a domestic violence situation, and you know, he slaps her, she punches him. After she punches him, that little moment of regret that he had, gone. Because now he kind of goes on the attack and starts, punching her, and he knocks her down. And he just turned a little bit more vicious.
Yeah. And now we see Sophie with a little bit of redemption. She comes back.
Well, before that, he's kind of standing over her first, right? The mayor, he's kind of standing over Penny. And then, yes, Sophie comes in. What does she do here? She jumps him.
Yeah, she gets him in like a chokehold.
Right, she jumps from behind him and like kind of wraps her arms around him. But she's plucky and spunky, but she's not very strong. No match for the mayor and his drunk man strength.
Yeah, and so he just kind of body slams her, and she's out of the way, and then
out cold. By the way, it looks like
completely out cold. And then he's on top of Penny, and he's starting to choke her, and he's basically saying, "Why did you make me do this to you? Why?" And he keeps saying, "Why?"
Yeah, why are you doing this to me? And he does have it. They struggle for a minute, but he has the upper hand, and he's choking her out now, dude. I mean, her face is changing colors. She looked like Adriana from Sopranos when Christopher was choking her out in that scene a moment before he let his hands off of her neck. It's exactly what that reminded me of. And it's over for Penny here, isn't it, Mike?
It does appear that way.
Until
the mayor is stopped cold in his tracks.
Brained from behind.
Yep.
You see him, the camera angle shifts to the back of his head because he gets hit. We don't see with what or from where.
Or by who.
or by who, but we see this big, nasty wound, like a little hole in his head. And he's dazed and he's touching it. And then.
And he's not going to be in season 3.
The mayor is down.
Down for the count.
And my initial thought was Sophie came too. But it's not Sophie that killed the mayor, is it?
Nope, it's Jacob. Loyal Jacob.
The Chinese manservant to the rescue. We haven't seen him in a few episodes. And there he is holding a poker. The business end of a poker. And there is that missing piece of the mayor's skull.
Attached to it. Yeah, very prominent in the scene.
Man, I mean, graphic.
Yeah.
And Jacob is in a sort of, what have I done?
Yeah.
And the camera pans up and we see an overhead shot. We've seen a couple of different overhead shots of that room or the mayor's home. But this one has an entirely different tone, doesn't it?
Yeah. This
wild. And the camera pans high and cut. Episode
and scene.
Mike, a lot of stuff to unpack from this one, right? First of all, let's talk about how we saw a lot of changings of the guards here in this episode. Starts with young Jun taking over, and Father Jun realizes he's done. He's gone. Zing gets locked up. He's done. He's lost his power. We now find out here that the mayor's dead. He's done. He's lost his power. So there's 3 power holders here who's abruptly no longer holding any cards.
And the funny thing is, out of those 3 scenarios, who would have thought that Penny and the mayor would be the most violent one out of all 3 of them?
Exactly, right? That is a really, really crazy scenario to think of when you realize that young Jun took power without any bloodshed happening over there. Zing, in a sense, had his power taken away, not through violence, but through bureaucracy, right? And dirty pool, let's be honest. And then the mayor, he lost by getting killed by a Chinese manservant. Blood everywhere.
Didn't have that on the bingo cards.
I didn't see that one coming, Mike. Even having watched the episode, I actually forgot, having previously seen the episode, I actually forgot it was Jacob that did this part for a moment until, boom, there he was on the screen. I was like, wow. So we've got a couple things now to look forward to as the story progresses. What happens in City Hall? What happens to Jacob and Penny? Right? That's still working backwards a little bit here. What happens with Li Yang and Mai Ling? What happens with Buckley having not knowing that Mai Ling's got some evidence of some sort to work with now? What happens to Bill, who's got a new swordsman problem to worry about? What happens to the Feng Hai? And finally, what happens with Father Jun and his exile, as well as young Jun now? How does he evolve and show us what kind of leader he actually is?
A lot of things to look forward to. A lot of things coming up. How's this going to play out?
Unbelievable. I cannot wait for the next one. We're moving on to episode 8 of season 2. That's 8, 9, 10. 3 to go, Mike, until we get to season 3. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to our show, Diced Onion, a Warrior podcast. Spread the word. Tell your friends that Mike and I do a great job talking about this show and hopefully uncovering some things and giving you food for thought as you watch these episodes again and again. And please stay tuned, because we will be rolling out some great guests very soon. Hopefully people from the show. And we really look forward to bringing that to you. Thanks for watching. We're out. Say goodbye, Mike.
Bye, Mike.